live. Thanks for joining me this morning. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for the audience?
Good morning, Connor. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Nick Meyers. I am the president and co-founder of Werkberry, and I'm talking to you from Annapolis, Maryland. So,
Very nice. So I know we're going to get into Workberry for most of the conversation today, but maybe let's start with any previous exits you've had as an entrepreneur, or any previous companies that you have run.
yeah, sure. So, interestingly, I started my career. I was recruited right out of college in Northern California by a little company called Ecosphere, where I was employee number 72, I think. You would know that company today as Dish Network. So I was had the opportunity to be a rising star on a shooting star, and so because of that explosive growth and the fact that it was a very decentralized organization, I quickly moved up to what was a regional director of sales and operations. In that role, kind of as a GM, it was very entrepreneurial, and we were given enough rope to hang ourselves, if you will. But I mean, I was responsible for my own
Mm-hmm.
P&L, my hiring, my firing, my negotiating our building leases, and so on. So I like to say that I got my MBA at the U of E, the University of EchoStar. So it was a fantastic learning opportunity. Some really good mentors there. When I left, I was the vice president of retail distribution. Actually, retail services is what they called it. And I had a pretty significant non-compete. I couldn't just go to Comcast or HBO or something like that. So I had a couple years to burn, and I had an entrepreneurial opportunity. A partner and I started a company that became National Pub Poker League. Basically, it was the first Texas Hold'em poker was all the
Mm-hmm.
rage at the time. I don't know if you remember that, Connor, but for
Yeah.
a while, you were watching on Bravo and the Travel Channel. There was they were 3-year-old reruns of World Series of Poker before they even had the lipstick cams. Everybody was kind of on this poker craze. So we took advantage of that and started National Pub Poker League, which basically, corporate events, nonprofits, but mostly in the bars and pubs, we would host live Texas Hold'em tournaments. The deal was learn for free, you know, play for free, win for real. That was the deal. So you could come in and play as long as you supported the bar. The bar would pay us like we were the band or a karaoke guy, bringing in a crowd on a Tuesday or Wednesday night kind of a thing. And
Mm-hmm.
we expanded that very, very rapidly. Within 17 months, we had gone into 14 states, and we were expanded into Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and we were about $7 million in ARR at that point, and it was
Wow.
it was an insane drive. However, lessons learned. It was difficult to do business with Joe's Pub and Grill because somebody has to collect the money, and usually my host, I would have one live person at each event. That would be the National Pub Poker League representative, and they'd be hosting the tournament for the night. And either the bar didn't pay you, or the bar paid the host, and the host stole the money, or whatever. There was a lot of
Yeah.
breakage collection challenges with that model, and we were growing so fast. I unfortunately I put too much of my effort into sponsorship, because it turned out that the started off with the local beer distributor, and then we went to national, like tonight's sponsor is Jack Daniels kind of a thing. But the online poker guys, Poker Stars and Ultimate Bet and Party Poker, they were tripping over themselves to become our sponsor, and we were able to.
Mm-hmm.
Probably 60% of our revenue was actually coming from these online poker guys. We would have our players play for free. We'd teach them how to play Texas Hold'em, and then we'd give them a promo code to one of these other things, and they were paying for a lot of the infrastructure. Well, I don't know if you remember, but when they shut down online poker like overnight, that turned off that revenue stream like a faucet, and
Mm-hmm.
so and that was very discouraging to me. And so I ended up exiting by selling that off to basically my regional managers, the guys who were doing the good work in Houston, in Knoxville, in Pittsburgh, and so on. So the managers broke that up and had, pieces. It still was running until this last year in Australia and New Zealand. So because we didn't have the
Okay.
same issue there. Anyway, so that was one.
Just
And then my wife and I started a company called Core Logic, which was a executive recruitment for bio, like life sciences.
mhm.
And that unfortunately stood that up just before the Great Recession started, and so that was like terrible timing. And so it's like, yeah, we ended up exiting that one, not successful exit that one. We just closed the doors and said, live to fight
Mhm.
another day. Anyway, so we
Yeah, if
could
we
go
could,
on, but
yeah, maybe just a couple clarifying questions there. I'm just curious, being an early employee at Dish Network, what did that mean from a compensation or equity standpoint? Was it relatively lucrative to be on the ground floor, or were you truly just
yeah.
salaried and it was more of a learning experience?
Yeah. So back then, Dish Network has a much, much better culture today, but back then, it was very Machiavellian. What have you done for me lately? And
Hmm.
it was a true meritocracy. So I don't know what that says about me, that I thrived in that environment. As long as you were putting points on the board, there were bigger fires to put out. But no, it was very well known as being 30% or so below market. I took that job coming out of college, no benefits, and
Mm.
I think it was $14,000 a year, something. When I was turning down, I was coming out of University in Northern California, Chico State, and I had opportunities with like Frito Lay and Wells Fargo Bank and Gallo Wines, that guys that all my buddies and peers that I would compete with in sports and for girls or whatever, they took those jobs that I walked away from, and I wanted to go where I saw the growth opportunity in satellite communications. I thought was an opportunity to get in on the ground floor, but at that time, it was not. Everybody thought I was crazy, right? Why would you go to that? But I think the small business, if you look for growth opportunities, that's where you can move up with an organization. So it wasn't until 3 years later that when I was promoted to director, that's when it came with incentive stock options. And at the
Got it.
time, the company wasn't even public. I mean, there was no options. It was like
Hmm.
this was the plan. But I believed in the vision. I believed in the leadership, and I knew that it was on its way. And so, and I remember years later on a cruise with our we'd take our top retailers on a incentive trip every year with some of the sales leadership and the founders and so on. And I remember after EchoStar stock had gone to 150 and split, and then gone to 150 and split, that kind of a thing.
Hmm.
I don't remember the rest of the context, but a number of us um, were standing around with Charlie and said, that incentive plan was never meant to make you guys millionaires. and and
Yeah.
and of course I couldn't help him. Said, well, I don't think you planned on being a billionaire. So it was
Yeah, true.
yeah. So it was. Sometimes you got to take that leap of faith, and I know that a lot of my friends and peers, actually mentors of mine, didn't last long enough in that culture to get the upside. And so when
Hmm.
I left, it was primarily because the stock options had all vested, and even the new options that they were giving out at that time, I didn't see the same sort of growth potential in it. And so you're really working for your salary at that time. And I
Hmm.
thought that it was time to move on. And, no matter how impactful I was at that organization, it was always going to be Charlie's success. It's like, so I needed to scratch my entrepreneurial itch on my own. And that was kind of the impetus for the change.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then maybe just really quick on National Pub Poker, because I think you said there was an exit there as well. Was that one? successful, or it sounds like it kind of, with the banning of online poker, you kind of had to potentially
Well,
maybe sell it
it
off for
was,
less than you wanted.
I guess by definition, you'd say it was successful because I sold it. I sold the operations in Australia to my partner there, and I sold the operations in the United States to our managers. But I had lost interest in, just it was going to become a lifestyle business of cranking away. It wasn't. We were on a trajectory that was awesome, and it's ironic because again, I was just too early. Because now, of course, DraftKings and everybody else is like they're
Mm-hmm.
online betting is all okay now, and so
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
right.
so it's just a
Timing's
little too
everything.
early, actually. And then after National Pub Poker League, first of all, it took a couple years. That was again during the housing crisis type of a deal. So I bought a couple, distressed houses out of short sales, and flipped them and turned them into. I became the real estate investor for a little while, and I had some investment properties. And then I started another company. It was called Accelerated Media with a buddy of mine from EchoStar. He was on the engineering side, and of course I was on the Dish Network sales side. But we were drinking buddies from a long time back, and we
Mm-hmm.
uh, he at EchoStar they were the first to really offer interactive television, meaning that we had the set-top box with a hard drive, right? And so you can remember the first DVR that was Dish Network, and we could insert, interactive stuff into the feed. So when the commercial comes up for Ford or Lincoln or whatever, we could have a pop-up that says, would you like to see more information? Hit select on your remote control and take you into, a virtual tour of the car, or
Mm-hmm.
schedule a test drive or whatever. Again, we were probably a little too early. And that was Doug's business primarily. I was brought on as a minority partner to help him out. And I spent a year mostly in Madison Avenue trying to teach the big Wall Street, the Madison Avenue ad agencies that there's this new inventory available, because we were building the apps for home and garden television and the outdoor channel and those kind of functionality to say we can help you monetize your mobile. Which we build a mobile app, a tablet app, and then interactive television on Dish Network and so on. And then we aggregated the space off of Cox and Comcast and Time Warner and all the cable guys and DirecTV and so on, so that we could sell their remnant space. That's a little bit complicated for your audience, I think, but each
Yeah.
distributor of video gets ad insertion rights, right? So if you're the local cable company, when you're on CNN, you get the 30 seconds at the bottom of each hour for your ad insertion, for you can sell local television commercials, right, kind of a thing. But it's a hard footprint to sell when you only have this many subscribers or whatever. We would aggregate that inventory and offer it for interactive television. We were a little too early in that space, but more importantly, it was on the right path. But unfortunately, my partner there, Doug, he kept complaining of what he called his pain in the ass. He couldn't sit in a meeting for very long or sit in a car for very long because he had this like sciatica. And finally, convinced him to go get an MRI, and he ended up having a growth on his tailbone that turned into, they did a biopsy, and it was metastasized small cell lung cancer, non-smokers lung cancer, and don't know where it came from or how he got it, but it was already all through his body, and he was 6 months later, he was dead. And so,
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, 50 years old, 4 kids. So um, his wife ended up, selling that business. So, that was the other exit. I mean, so that was a successful exit for her, but I didn't take any of that. So,
Okay. No, I think that's interesting, and I don't know if you're willing to share. Like in, I want to go back to National Pub Poker because I think maybe that was your most successful exit. I don't know if you're willing to share like a range, or how much you were able to realize there when you sold it. I go back to the 7 million in ARR. Was it cut down quite a bit when you sold it to the operational leaders at Australia and the United States, or what were you
oh
able to
yeah,
exit with
yeah.
there?
So I mean, I was making good money off of that during the rise up of the heyday of it. So that was, two or three
Mm.
hundred thousand dollars a year on the low end on those for that period of time when we were rolling. And then of course when you lose the sponsorship dollars, and that all of a sudden your top line revenue is going to be cut, and the revenue that's left is the one that's is lower margin and harder to collect on, and so on. And you need those boots on the ground locally to be driving that. And so they didn't need me as much in terms of driving the international expansion and big, biz dev deals. And so, sold that off. I don't know. Individually, they were not much, Connor. It was probably
Okay.
$250,000 in the United States, and then a little more than that from Australia, New Zealand. But
Got it. Okay.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then so I'm just curious. It sounds like you've started quite a few companies, and it seems that maybe so far getting in on the ground floor at Dish Network was the most lucrative and the best
oh yeah,
opportunity so far. Yeah.
yep,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
No, I think that's a good overview of your background just to kind of understand how you got to where you are today. And so maybe we could shift to your current venture and company, Workberry. And so I'd
Sure.
like to just start off with your pitch. So if you can just give me your best 1 or 2 minute pitch on what Workberry does and the value it provides.
Sure. Okay. So, our mission statement on the wall says we are solving the hiring crisis for small business, right? And mission statements are
Hmm.
supposed to be lofty. The reality is that the value proposition is that we generate more quality candidates easier, faster, and cheaper than is otherwise available for small business. So, small businesses today are struggling to hire, and this has been going on for a long time. It's just gotten much worse with the current labor participation rates and so on.
Hmm.
And they have not had any good options to this day. To this point, you really have two options, right? You can, other than the free stuff, everybody puts a sign in the window, but that doesn't work. And so, what you're left with is you can either outsource the whole nightmare to like a staffing agency, RPO, temp to perm, whatever you call it. Those guys are very expensive, where 20 or 25% of the annual comp, right? So if you're hiring an entry level person for $40,000 a year, you're stroking a check to these guys for $8,000 or $10,000. It's just not tenable. And so
Yeah.
option two, what they've been left with is they're completely on their own to try to navigate the world of job board hell, right? And play post and pray. They go to
Hmm.
Monster, they go to LinkedIn, they go to Zip, they go to Craigslist, they go to Career Builder, whatever, and they have to try to build their own profile. They have to try to figure out how to write a good quality job ad, and then they pay $379 on Monster for one board, for one job, for 1 month, and then do it again for $590 over at ZipRecruiter, $700 now at Indeed or whatever. Not only is it expensive, it's this huge time suck because, and mostly they spend their days sifting through unqualified noise, right? So we fix all of that. And now the $1 million question, how? Well, it's a two-part solution there. One is by using programmatic digital advertising for what they would spend on one of those premium boards, we can give them all of those premium boards. So we can cast a much wider net and include search and social and niche sites and professional sites and so on. For $475 once, you could get a much wider net. So we
Hmm.
can um, be far more cost effective with your advertising dollar. And number two, what we have found, and was been stood up more recently, is that they just need some help. They don't know. A lot of them are 80% of their own problem. They have job titles that don't make any sense, right? That aren't going to show up in a
Hmm.
proper search string or whatever, and or the job description doesn't fit the job title, or their compensation's way out of whack, or we generate a bunch of candidates for them and they don't get back to them for 4 or 5 days. They weren't waiting around. So if we can do a little bit of that support coaching for about 90% less than they would spend at a temp agency or something like that. So we can make it much more, it's simply the most cost effective way to find talent.
Okay. And so when did you start Workberry? How long has it been running?
We stood up the company in 2019, going through a incubator to kind of suss out the business model and so on. So when Doug passed away, sold Accelerated Media. That happened to coincide with our youngest going out of state to college, and so we were going to be empty nesters. It was kind of like, man, tomorrow's not really a promise. Look what just happened to Doug. We've got this
Hmm.
sweet window where we don't have babies having babies or whatever. So we sold that business, sold the house, bought a sailboat, and took off to the Caribbean for 3 years. And we were live
Very
aboard
nice.
cruisers. Yeah,
Yeah.
and during that period of time, I got to tell you, it was took maybe a year and a half of sunset cocktail cruises where you start to really unpack. And my wife, Lori Ann, who is our chief of product and really the visionary behind Workberry, she has spent her entire 30-year career at the cutting edge of talent acquisition. She's owned her own staffing agencies, has had successful exits there. She was the head of talent acquisition for Emerson Process, and then Dish Network or EchoStar, and so she when you're going to hire 1,000 people a month, right? Everything from satellite installers to CSR call centers and accountants and salespeople and satellite engineers. You don't call Monster and pay $379 to put up an ad. They're calling you to
Hmm.
get part of that ad buy. And so once I understood how she was buying that inventory on an automated basis, I'm like, that's programmatic advertising. That's what we were doing at Accelerated Media with of course regular
Yeah.
advertising. And so we just started to think about how could we democratize access to that? How could we, because programmatic recruitment or recruitment marketing is sometimes called, has been out there for a little over a decade, and the Fortune 500 and the very largest staffing firms, that's how they buy the inventory. But you've just never had access to or known about it at the small to medium sized business. So when we sold the boat in the end of 2018, we came back to start this business model and to stand up Workberry and to go through that process. Right. So that was, I think,
Hmm.
2019. We launched the company, but then we were ready with our. You'll like this. We were ready with our MVP to launch with our first channel partners. March 5th of 2020, I was in Arizona and rolled out with our first channel partner. They brought in 7 businesses to have a little lunch and learn to hear about Workberry. 6 of them signed up on the spot. Everybody needed help hiring, right?
Yeah.
And so um, from there, I was supposed to fly to St. Petersburg and then to Nashville and to Washington, D.C., because I had these channel partners lined up to go. We were off to the races, right?
Hmm.
And of course, the very next week, the world shut down, and the economic and political response to COVID, everybody went from needing help hiring to how do I lay everybody off and what's a PPP loan? And so,
Yeah.
it was crippling. We had to stop and in order to live to fight another day, we needed to get pretty draconian with our cuts, and of course that was when all of the federal assistance that was out there for business, we didn't qualify for any of it because you basically had to show how much revenue you lost from 2019 into 2020. They could replace your revenue, but if you didn't, we had a business, but we only had money going out. Was paying developers and paying for our staff and paying for building out the distribution of the advertising campaigns and so on. So we were literally about to have our first revenue when everything got shut down. So we didn't qualify for unemployment. We didn't qualify for any of those loans. And these are some of the things you can't anticipate. I suppose as president, I should take responsibility. I failed to predict the global pandemic, and that therefore I
Yeah.
therefore left ourselves undercapitalized for when we came coming back. But lessons learned. The in 2021, and the end of 2020, all through 2021 into the Q1 of 2022, that like 18-month period, money was still very cheap, and all of the private equity guys were tripping over themselves doing, there was one crazy deal, one unicorn investment after another. And in hindsight, I probably should have spent more time raising funds then. But my thought process is that I've been on the other side of the table as an angel investor. When somebody has an idea, a concept, and you're investing in it, the terms are pretty egregious because 8 or 9 out of 10 of those are going to fail. And so you need to make up all of your profit on that 10th deal. And
Mm-hmm.
so I knew that if I have a real product with real revenue and delighted customers, I de-risked the business, I could get better terms. So that's what, instead we focused on trying to get back to it. And so skip ahead,
So,
you know, go
yeah,
ahead.
could you talk about in 2019, did you have funding at that point or how much funding you'd received and at what valuation?
Oh, great question. So because I was avoiding real funding from angels and so on, we were bootstrapping. We
Okay.
got $150,000 from friends and family that knew us, invested and loved the idea and trusted us. And then we did win because we were in Erie, Pennsylvania. We had come back. We were exposed to Ben Franklin Technology Partners, a wonderful organization. The idea is that it's actually a part of Pennsylvania State has a fund that Penn State University manages for them. So you can imagine, public sector meets higher education, so it doesn't get more um, bureaucratic and
Mm-hmm.
but it, because of that, it really put us through the paces. It was friendly. It was really friendly terms, just convertible debt note, with the goal of being to create jobs in Pennsylvania. And so they really helped me perfect the messaging and build out our business plan and our pro formas and all that type of stuff. And they invested $150,000 into Workberry. And then we won a accelerator contest through the Erie Regional Chamber, and that was a $50,000 also a safe kiss. But so at this point, I've not given up any equity. We
Okay.
just have convertible notes, a couple.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, that's 150, 300. So about $350,000 of convertible notes. And otherwise, my wife and I are into this probably for $500,000 that we've invested. So to get to this point.
Okay. Yeah, so you're getting close to a million. And so COVID hits, you buckle down, you survive COVID, and maybe let's talk about the last 12 months.
Yeah.
And maybe you can elaborate on you're selling to small businesses. I think you said it costs them $475 per job posting. Is that the main revenue stream? And is it just they just pay a fee every time they want to post? Um, how
Okay.
does that work?
Yeah. So the revenue model is we called ourselves SaaS Plus. The idea was that if you have people who have some ongoing hiring challenges, maybe 6 or 7 or more a year, um, they'll never have to go to Zip or to Indeed or any of that type of stuff. And we have a 3-pronged solution. One is the platform itself, Workberry, which is basically we call it our hiring platform. You could think of it like a CRM or an ATS Lite. If you're actually, I'm going to start with answering your question. So there's the revenue sources is there's the subscription fee, $39. It's not going to break the bank, you know what I mean? And then there's the advertising revenue if and when you need a heavy lift to advertise and broadly push that job ad out there. And then there is hire desk services, where if you want us to manage that job for you and screen those candidates and that type of stuff. So you're paying for labor there. And so those are the 3 revenue buckets.
Is and really quick, it's $39 a month. Is that the
Thir-
subscription fee?
Yep, $39.95 as the business fee. Now we also have options where there's no monthly, there's no long term commitment. So some people will just bundle that in. What we have found recently is, obviously there's a whole lot of really small mom and pops that have a team of 4 or something like that, and they lose one person. That's 25% of their headcount. And so the cost of
Mhm.
vacancy is huge. The pain is huge. And they haven't recruited in a year, 2 years. They don't know what they're doing and they really need the help. And they come on board. They love us. They get that position filled. They give us referrals. But then 2 months into it, 3 months, they say, why am I paying $40 a month if I'm not going to hire again? So they want to treat us like a job board. And so we've come up with solutions to say, okay, look, if you engage us for hire desk services, you don't have to pay the SaaS fee. Just come back when you need it. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of the model. But one of the challenges from the investment community, if you talk to VCs, when you create something truly unique like this, and you're solving a really painful problem for a really big market, everybody wants to hear about it. And so I go through these motions only to find out that, well, we only invest in B series or beyond with $5 million check writers, or we only invest in medical device, or we only invest in Iowa, or whatever. They all have some investment mandate. And so you start to narrow in on this group. You say, okay, what are the size of the check writers? At what stage do they invest in? And some of them say something like B2B SaaS, which is great. I'm like, okay, that's us, B2B SaaS. But then when you get to that second or third meeting and they find out that, well, right now, because the base is fairly small, the SaaS portion of the revenue is really small relative to the advertising revenue or even the service revenue. And so
Mhm.
they say, oh, well, we have to stick to, you're not pure B2B SaaS. I'm like, no, but these are good margins, revenue sources over here. So trying to find that Goldilocks investor is hard, especially right now. We were going through a
Mhm.
fundraise in 2020, 2021, 2021. We were invited to an investor conference deal where it was like venture speed dating, right? They set up 8 different meetings for me, and you got 7 minutes, go. And so but that helped me, get our pitch decks and all that type of stuff done. We came out of there with a lead investor ready to do a seed round, $1.5 million, and that was going to be on a $10 million pre-money valuation. And then we started.
Mhm.
That was June or July 1st, I think, of 2022, right? So if you're 2022 last year. And so what ended up happening, if you recall, you remember summer of last year, what happened is after 2 years of the stock markets just going up and at zero interest rates, all of a sudden markets are crashing down and interest rates
Mhm.
are going up, and everybody's talking about recession and about inflation. And so the private equity market kind of shut down. And so everybody, you found out who was swimming naked basically. And so some of them, including our lead investor, had a liquidity problem. And so
Okay.
while we're going through the due diligence period, which was a huge time suck, okay, um, they ended up having a liquidity problem and allowed their exclusivity period to expire. Well, at that point, all of a sudden that there's 60% fewer deals happening right now, and they're happening at 50% of the valuation. So if nothing else changes, all of a sudden the investment community, instead of thinking you're $10 million pre-money, now you're $5 million pre-money. And if you're doing an equity round, you're giving up literally double to get the same money. And so we backed away from that and said, no, 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 we don't need that much money now, because we have organic growth happening through referrals, and we have um, some pretty good pipeline opportunities in front of us. So I'm right now, I'm in the process of switching to like a $300,000 to $500,000 range, and I'd like to keep it in convertible debt. But those are different investors than when you're talking about an equity round at 1.5. So then you're kind of starting over with this other group of investors. And it's a matter of how much time do you have to spend there? Because right now, the only thing I really need the funding for is to expand my team so that I
Mhm.
can sales. I need more. Right now, we're a team of 7. I think that's what you were asking. Um, but I got 2 gals in Colombia, and I've got a developer in Bosnia, and I've got a guy in CSR in India, because these are,
Yeah.
we were work from home before it was cool, and we're in the talent industry. We can find the people, and so it's 40% of what I would have to pay locally, but I need salespeople here, managers
Yeah.
here, that type of stuff. And for that, I was like, well, I can either spend it on trying to sell, because we have our revenue growth, and our team, our lead, our CTO is here, our chief of product, and our customer client success managers here in the States. But now it's like that's where I'm operating at that break even until I get an influx of capital where I could pay some salespeople to come on board. Or maybe somebody's listening
Got
who
it.
wants to say, hey, they could do what I did at Dish Network at EchoStar and come on at a vision with for a much lower base and an upside opportunity and commission, that kind of thing.
Okay. No, no, I think that's interesting. So is that what, let's talk about, I'm curious, the last 12 months, what your sale or what your revenue numbers and sales numbers are.
Let's see. So we were been growing at about 8 to 12% month over month, and
Hmm.
I looked at the May numbers was like $33,000 in top line revenue, and July was just $51,000 in top line revenue. So that's kind of where we're at. So we're pacing right now. We'll probably finish the year at about $700,000 in top line revenue. Last year we finished at $440,000 in top line revenue. So we're having.
So yeah, and maybe we could talk more about your growth plan as you look to the future, maybe like 1 year, 5 years. And I understand you kind of explained the difficulties of getting around to funding and kind of going for the convertible note route. I mean, what's your goal as you look farther out, and what's your strategy to continue growing? It sounds like hire salespeople, but are you expecting to for this to really take off, or is it going to be slow and steady?
Well, it should really take off if we get the right partner. So one of the reasons that there's three other entities that do what we do, this programmatic recruitment or recruitment marketing. And the other three, like I said, been around over a decade, and they all provide this for very large enterprises because they can cultivate a single relationship with the head of talent acquisition at Starbucks or whatever, and get a
Hmm.
raw feed of thousands of open jobs that they pull into their DSP, their ad exchange engine.
Hmm.
And then they push that back into their HRIS system or their HCM or ATS, whatever their tool that they're using. So they don't have that front end GUI that we created for the small business. But there's a reason why they have not gone down market, because doing business with small business is hard and expensive. And if you're going to do business with Joanne's Heating and Plumbing, somebody needs to talk to Joanne. Somebody needs to explain that this is something different. This is new. This is better, right? And then teach Joanne how to use the tool real quick. It takes 20 minutes, and then collect the money from Joanne, all for what, 2 or 3 or 4 ads a year that she might hire, right? And so the idea, our original go-to-market strategy was to go through channel partners that already have a trusted relationship with hundreds or thousands of small businesses. So we would start with like PEOs and ASOs. That's a PEO is
Hmm.
a professional employment organization. It's a terrible acronym. Basically, they're all in the HR outsourcing space, and their value proposition is, hey Connor, you got into business to make the donuts. You should focus on making the donuts, and we'll take all of that HR and admin services off your plate for you. We'll handle your payroll, your benefits, your safety and workers comp and so on. And so offering those guys are perfect to offer Workberries, because if they're how are you in the HR outsourcing business and you don't have a solution for their number one HR problem, which is finding talent in the first place. And
Hmm.
so we should be a no-brainer, slam dunk, obvious missing arrow in their quiver. And so when we get channel partners that do that, they could hockey stick that growth very, very rapidly.
Yeah.
Thus far, they have been the problem, right? That's the long pole in the tent. especially when I focus on these HR outsourcing companies, because they're in the HR space, so they think they know something about recruiting, and so they have to unlearn everything that they know and say, no, this really is new technology there. I'm having so I'm going down a path for these channel partners as much as I can by myself. How many calls in a day can I make, kind of a thing, while I'm also doing biz dev and I'm legal and I'm accounting and I do payroll, that kind of thing. But I could go if I get those type of channel partners, they could turn up very rapidly. And then the other thing that we've now evolved to the point where we're doing some sales automation, saying, all right, let's focus in on areas that we know that there's consistent pain, and we know that we have a fantastic solution. So manufacturers, construction, quick service restaurants, insurance agents, anywhere that there's hard to fill and consistent need, I'm starting to do sales automation. So email automation, outreach, watch this quick video, download this webinar, click here to sign up, and then we do the high touch onboarding. And so that's in the early phases of this. In the meantime, most of our stuff is coming from referrals, because small businesses talk to other small businesses and they say, oh my God, you got to try this. And that's why we've got like a 96% retention. If people use Workberry, they're never going back to beat their head against the wall at Zip and Indeed and Monster again. So,
Gotcha. No, I think that's really interesting. And so maybe we could talk about your competitors. And it sounds like you've mentioned that these typical, I guess, ad listing agencies focus on really big Fortune 100 companies. And you said that the job boards aren't really competition because they're so expensive and they don't really fit the needs of a small employer. I mean, do you feel like you have any competition in this space?
So I got some great advice from a VC investor to say, nobody wants to hear that, you don't have competition. Right. So I've got to say, of course I have competition. What I have is there's no apples to apples comparison with what we offer. That being said, where is the small business spending their money to try to find talent? Where are they spending their recruiting dollars? That would be my competition. And so in that case, my competition is Zip and Indeed and Monster and LinkedIn and Craigslist and those individual job boards, because that's what the small business knows. They hate it.
Mhm.
It's awful. And we are so much better of a solution to it, but that's kind of where they're spending their money today. Because in terms of you're right, on the magic behind our right ad, our programmatic advertising, that is only available to really large enterprises, because there's like a $7,000 to $10,000 a month minimum buy-in for an ad. So if you're this Subway, or if you're Frito-Lay or Pepsi or whatever, those guys have that budget. They have access to that, and they have a head of talent acquisition that might be aware that those things are out there. But your typical small to medium sized manufacturer, they're looking for a CNC machinist and a certified welder, a CDL driver, right? Those guys don't have LinkedIn profiles. Most of them don't even have an updated resume on the job board. We fill more of those positions off of fantasy football sites and Facebook and Craigslist than in 80s hairband sites, whatever. Because that's where they live on the internet. And so we serve them an invitation to apply with or without a resume, answer a couple quick questions. So there's a couple of things that, why we can generate about 300% more quality candidates for the dollar than is otherwise available to these small businesses. But our biggest competition is ignorance. People don't know, right? It's like I'm sitting here with the cure for cancer and nobody knows about it. And just habit. This is what they know. This is how they trudge along. And so, and the other thing with small businesses, they know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And so some of these, I've had restaurateurs that are like going, well, I tried these free boards and whatever, nobody's willing to work anymore. I'm like, free boards haven't worked for years, right? You're just giving a bunch of junk. And your business is closed 3 nights a week because you can't get enough staff. and you're going to complain about the cost of a one job ad, right? We could fill
Yeah,
your
yeah,
positions, right? You're gonna it pays. It advertising pays. It doesn't cost. You know.
yeah. It's the bigger picture. Okay, no, I think that's really interesting. So, a couple more questions on Workberry. What? So it sounds like you're wearing many hats. Can you just briefly give me what a day in the life is as the founder and CEO of Workberry?
Yeah. So if you have a room full of decision makers and you want to fly me in, I'm still the best sales guy I know. Okay, so that's what you want me to come in for, that kill, and I did that a lot throughout my career. But as it turns out, in all those other positions, particularly like my time at Dish Network and so on, where they would do that, it would fly me in to close the big deal, kind of a thing. But I had resources, and it's the other 80% of selling is the blocking and tackling, right? That's the you got to do the
Mhm.
prospecting and the email outreach and the keep the prospect warm and follow up with phone calls and follow up, so that's the part that I'm not as naturally good at, and it takes more time. And so I have to divide my days, or sometimes I'll take a day of the week and say I have to focus on updating. It's going to be about funding. So looking for new VCs, or reaching out or following up with VCs, keeping the VCs that I'm talking to warm about where we're at in the process. That has to be, half of a day on Thursdays or whatever. And then the other days I have to stay focused on the business at hand. So I've got a block of time that I do accounting and payroll, and then otherwise
Mhm.
it's what am I doing on biz dev? Oh, and then I have a meeting, once a week to go through our and any legal issues, or contract reviews or anything like that. That because business development deals, that's the other thing on the go to market strategy that just makes perfect sense. Is anybody who's got a software out there that already does payroll, time and attendance tracking, or whatever for these small businesses, we'd be the perfect add-on to their payroll. With a click of a button, you can advertise the job. That's a much faster way to leverage somebody else's footprint. So another reason why this could explode like that, if all of a sudden, Workberry is available in the QuickBooks marketplace, or something like that. So
Yeah.
those deals have to get chased down, and so that's I know it's not a real clear answer, because I'm not. That's one of the areas that I am not as disciplined at, and it's hard when you talk about what it takes to be a startup entrepreneur, right? Know thyself, and it's easy to have a couple of wins under your belt or whatever, and to think that I'm good at all this stuff. But the reality is, I'm good at setting a vision and getting people to buy in on that vision and rallying the troops and having that motivation. But the day to day, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and circling back, completing the loop on the follow up, that's a lot of sales operations that I'm just not as good at, and I need to stay more disciplined at it. And so I find myself beating
Mhm.
myself up on those kind of things all too often, right? Um, and
Yeah.
then cleanup stuff. So if I can sit in front of TV at night and clean up email, because I get 300 a day or whatever, and say which ones are actually news versus important and what needs to be dealt with when. So time
Yeah.
management is a struggle for anybody who doesn't have. Here's what you do right now. Any small business, you don't even need to be a startup entrepreneur, but any small business, people wear a lot of hats. And so you normally, when you hire somebody, you're saying, okay, we're going to need help on all kinds of things. And so whether you are helping us with the launch codes for the next satellite or taking out the garbage, don't question things when we ask you to do stuff. But for the vast majority of your time, your role is this, and this is what you are compensated on, and this is what you're focused on. And then people get good at doing that, right? Whether they are
Mhm.
accounting or sales or whatever. And so when you're in the startup, you have to be, if you're going to be a founder in particular, you better be comfortable with the uncomfortable, because you're going to
Yeah.
be uncomfortable a lot. You have to know that everything costs more and takes longer than it should, and that can be very frustrating. And then you have to ask yourself, are you in a financial position to do it? Because you can say, okay, well, we've got this opportunity. I've got to make this trip. That means we're not getting paid this month because I need to keep the money in the business for this other purpose. And there's a lot of people who can't afford to go to a startup, right? Because they want the upside, but they can't afford to not make a consistent paycheck today, And so,
Mhm.
and as the founder, you can't ask that of your people, but you need to be able to do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. And like you said, you wear many hats, so I'm sure every day is different, and you just have to keep it going, keep it pushing forward. So definitely admire that. And so maybe the last question on Workberry is, I'm curious, in your mind, what's the vision, for the end goal? Is it an acquisition, or what are you looking at as you grow the company?
Well, we are never opposed to hearing about acquisition, but we're builders, not sellers necessarily. However,
Mhm.
um, there's a couple of some of the big PEOs. They'd be foolish not to acquire us and have it as an exclusive, which is a huge differentiator, right? So that would be probably a pretty obvious synergy if it was some an Insperity, an ADP, a Paychex, a Venture, so one of
Mhm.
those guys. They that would be obvious synergy for acquisition. But I'll tell you, I don't normally talk about the BHAG. You know what BHAG stands for? The Big Hairy Audacious Goal. But
Yeah.
um,
Let's
Workberry
hear it.
today is focused on solving the hiring crisis for the small business, right? So we'll make it easier, faster, and cheaper for you to find talent for your business, and that's kind of the value proposition today. But the other side of the coin, long term, the process for the candidates is freaking awful. I mean, if I don't know when the last time you went to try to look for a job was, but where do you go? Do you go to Zip? Do you go to Indeed? Do you go to Monster? Do you go to the company's website? And then most of them, especially if it's a company you've heard of before, it's a mid-size or larger company, they have an ATS that gets in the way because large companies have complex onboarding, right? Multiple levels of requisition approval, and they're subject to EEOC and Title IX and OFCCP. So they have a complicated piece of software that gets in the way to make sure that they stay in compliance, which means your experience in 20 minutes online filling out an application, asking all the stuff that you've already have on your resume, right? And then it goes into a black hole and you never hear from anybody again. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
terrible, terrible experience for the candidate. And we want to flip that. And so long term, the candidate journey, candidates should be in charge. It should be like a dating app, right? Hey, I like this
Mhm.
company, here's their culture, give them a wink, and the company can look at your profile, kind of a thing, and wink back, and then we can merge the two. And so that's a longer term, but that's a different business model. How do you monetize that is going to look very different. Those would be different investors. But yeah, that's part of the big hairy audacious goal. You want to change the world, right? In terms of
Yeah.
the employee employer
The entire
experience. Yeah,
hiring process. Yeah.
yeah.
So I think, yeah, I think that's a great goal to have. And so I think you're doing some great work with Workberry. It sounds like you've survived COVID, and now you're pivoting, and now you're aiming for growth. So I think there are good things ahead. So I wish you the best of luck. And maybe we could just close with a few questions from you directly as the founder, and with all the experience that you have, and maybe just some advice for any aspiring entrepreneurs. What would you advise someone that wants to start their own business?
Well, first thing I think that we should, being a small business owner, is means that I guess you would say you're an entrepreneur. But
Hmm.
a small business owner is an entrepreneur, but all entrepreneurs aren't classified as small business owners. You can go put down a small investment and take over, a Subway franchise or whatever, and you're a small business owner, right? But
Yeah.
it's very different. Or you're going to take over your dad's, shoe shop or whatever. You're a small business owner. That's different. than doing startup entrepreneur. You're going to create something new, and that's a different animal. And to separate those two, right?
Yeah.
To go be a business owner. If you're taking over somebody's existing business, or you're using a franchise, which here's the toolkit, you can just be motivated person, and you'll probably be okay there as long as you're got a established business or something that you're going to take over. Starting from scratch as being a true startup entrepreneur, you almost have to be a sadist. I mean, I guess a masochist, right? A sadist gives the punishment, but yeah, you have to be okay with the uncomfortable, and you can't let small setbacks derail you. And you have to be. The advantage that you have is that you're lean, and so you're nimble. You need to be able to pivot, and you can't get too stuck in your own rut. And I mean, we've have been guilty of that ourselves, right? Saying,
Yeah.
like we talk about the PEOs. I mean, it's so obvious that they should. This is a no brainer or whatever. But I can't wait around for them to figure out this. I need to work with manufacturing organizations and with chambers of commerce or somebody else that can move quicker than these PEOs. So
Mhm. No,
I
yeah, I
guess
think
that would be my advice for you need to have the idea needs to be vetted out, right? Will the market, you can put something together that's never been put together before, but it all comes down to a product or service is worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. So the first thing you need to find out is, here's what I can do it for. Will somebody pay for that? Is there a demand for that? And is it profitable that way? Because if you can't, that's where you have to start with whatever your idea is. It was, who's going to pay for it, and how much will they pay, and can you do it profitably for that? Because
Mhm.
there's a lot of great ideas out there that never get past that acid test, which is the first thing I look at when somebody's got an idea.
Yeah, you have to determine, is there a market for what you're selling?
Mm-hmm. How big
So
is
I
it,
think
and
that's
how
good
lucrative?
advice. I think, yeah, and I think it's good advice that there's a complete differentiation between starting from scratch and just owning a small business or taking over a small business. So I think that was a great call out. And so maybe we could just end here with anything else, any final thoughts, and where can people find you and find out more about Workberry?
Well, Workberry is with an E, so it's WERKBERRY.com, just workberry.com. And they can reach out at info@workberry.com if somebody, if they know a business that is struggling to find talent, or is beating their head against the wall, wasting money and time at the various job boards trying to navigate that by themselves. They can reach out at info@workberry.com. And otherwise, investors can also reach me through that. That's the monitored email that somebody will get back to you within one business day. And so if
Mm-hmm.
whether you're a small business looking for help there, or you're interested in investing, or maybe you think you can help with Workberry's growth pattern, knowing that we are a little cash constrained at the moment. So, but you want to participate in the upside or work on commission, that kind of thing, we could. I'm always entertaining those conversations.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nick. I'll also put your company website and your LinkedIn profile in the description so people can find you there. And I appreciate you taking the time with me this morning.
Well, this has been great. Thanks, Connor. Have a great day.